Hello, and welcome to our special presentation on how to best complete the PMP certification application. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and I'm the CEO of PMO Advisory, as well as a professor at Montclair State University, as well as China Europe International Business School. I have a very broad background in project management, and I play multiple roles from a practitioner to an entrepreneur leading a company, to a professor in project management, as well as serving on various global standard bodies, promoting, advancing, and really writing about project management. The topic for today is PMP certification, specifically the application process to obtain that certification. So you could see the agenda that we have here. We'll first go through the certification process, then talk about how you should plan your application, write your application, and then end with some do's and don'ts as you complete the PMP application. So let's start with the application process itself. In many ways, it has three parts, and some people only find two of those three parts. First, you have to complete the application, and that's when PMI conducts the completion review. And we'll dive more into details about the application a little bit later. The second step, which only hits about 5 to 10% of the people, is the audit. What PMI would like you to do is to validate what you put into the application, and people are randomly selected for an audit, so about 5 to 10% of the time. You should plan that in advance, by the way, even though it is 5 to 10% of the time, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, the process third is really simple, just paying. And once you make the payment, the clock starts in which you have 1 year to complete the exam, the PMP exam. And you can have up to 3 tries in that 1 year. And then, of course, the re-exam fee after the first time can be quite expensive. So in short, this is the overview of the PMI certification process. Once you do obtain the certification, it only lasts for 3 years. It's valid only for that period. For you to continue to be PMP certified, you need to constantly seek ways to renew yourself, to keep yourself abreast of the latest development project management. And this is where PMI developed the talent triangle. And there are 3 major components. There is the technical skill, so say how to use a particular tool like Microsoft Project. There's the project leadership skill, leading and motivating teams. And there's a strategic and business management skill, making sure that the project, for example, are aligned with the strategy. In that 3-year cycle, in order to renew, you need to earn 60 PDUs, or professional development units. And there are actually many ways you can earn that: by taking lessons, by volunteering, by writing and presenting. So that's a separate topic, and there is a CCR handbook, the continuous certification renewal handbook, for you to look at those details. So let's look at the application process, which after all is the topic of today's presentation. The first is the completeness review, and generally PMI takes about 5 days. Now, during the pandemic, I actually have heard stories that it took longer, so you may need to be a little bit extra patient in situations such as a pandemic. But first, make sure you qualify for the PMP certification, and it really has 2 major criteria. One is the education, and second is the leadership experience. Complete and submit the application. You have to be truthful. You are held to the Integrity PMI's Code of Ethics. And then PMI reviews the application for completion and then respond, generally about 5 to 10 days. As I mentioned earlier, about 5 to 10% of the applicants are randomly selected for an audit. In this case, the audit really focuses on confirming the experience or the education requirements that you have. So one of the ways to make life easy is as you complete the application, put in the various experience, you put in the referral of people, make sure these people are still around and they're happy to validate for you. So a good practice is, even at the time of writing the application, reach out to those people, making sure that letting them know that you're completing PMP certification. And if you do get audited, then you could resolve it, frankly, very quickly. Personally, I got audited twice. I have 4 PMI certification. And my second audit, which I got pretty smart from the first audit, I got it done within less than a week, because these people are already informed. They know all I have to do is mail them the application or email it to them, but they do have to actually physically mail back the application to you. So that takes a little bit of a legwork. Once your application accepted, completing the audit, which is only hitting about 10% of the people, you get to the third part, which is the payment. And the payment is very straightforward. You could pay by credit card, for example, if you're in the United States. And once you make the payment, you can schedule for the exam. Now, you're eligible for the exam up to 1 year to schedule your exam. And in that year, you could actually fail the PMP exam twice. Each time you have to pay a re-examination fee, though, and you do need to finish it by the third attempt. If you don't, what it does is you need to wait for a year and resubmit the application and start the process over again. So let's dive a little bit into the detailed qualifications. Education-wise, you need to have 35 hours of project management education, or if you have the Certified Associate in Project Management, that qualifies you. This is something new, by the way. If you're looking at PMP some years ago, the CAPM part isn't there. In terms of the experience, you need to have 60 months of leading projects for those with a secondary degree, a high school diploma, for example. If you have an advanced degree, a bachelor degree, a master degree, you need only 36 months of leading project experiences. And the key word here is leading. So just to clarify, it is not working on a project. It is not being a team member. It is where you are the leader. Now, some will argue, well, I'm not the project manager, but I worked as a team lead for a very large team. That probably, and you should do a little bit self-evaluation, but that probably qualifies you in a large project. In some organization, we'll call that program. There could be multiple sub-projects, and leader of those sub-projects are genuine leaders, genuine project manager. Some of the sub-project could be, for example, a lot bigger than smaller project in another company. But the key word about leading is you have to lead people, make difficult decisions, make trade-off decisions. Like when you're confronting with a dilemma, do I do another round of testing, for example? That could take a couple of weeks, but potentially delaying my project. So those are some tough situations. Also working with people, motivating team members. If people are not working as you hoped, what have you done to coach them, mentor them? Possibly remove them and hire new people. So some of these leadership experience you can really only gain by practice, and that's why Project Management Institute look for those leadership experiences. Now, plan your application. A couple things. One thing broadly, this is especially important if your title isn't project manager. Project management, for example, is a fairly broad topic today. A lot of managerial titles, from operation managers to service manager, may work in the role project. So if your title doesn't say project manager or project director, right, start digging a little bit deeper. What have you done in your current role? Let's say you're the chief curriculum designer for your organization. Well, that doesn't sound like a project manager up front. But think about every curriculum that you help to assemble, to design. Do you have to go through assessment? What kind of design process do you go through? What are your involvement in the build out of the training? Do you pilot them? If the answer is yes to many of these, and you are accountable and responsible for managing a team of course developers, business analysts, technical writers, I would say you are project leader. So think about that in a broader term. The second is drinking the Kool-Aid. Drinking the Kool-Aid means that you really should read Project Management Body of Knowledge, the latest version. Currently, as I'm recording this, it is the 6th edition, but the 7th edition is coming out very soon. The reason you want to read it is you want to use the words in which the PMI reviewer, frankly, are familiar with. For example, do you write a project charter? Now, in your world, you may not call it a charter. You may just call it a project description. But if you use the word project charter, the reviewer of your application can almost have that immediate resonance, a familiar understanding of the core concepts in project management. That's what I meant by drinking the Kool-Aid. Understand the PMI terms. And then finally, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, even though you only have 5 to 10% chance of being audited, it is a good idea to get those references early and get them ready if nothing else. And by the way, even if you're not audited, that's a little bit bragging right when you finish your PMP. So it's a good way to celebrate as well. So let's dive a little bit deeper in each of these. Make sure that you capture your project management leadership experience. The key word here is leadership. It is not your participation in a project. Many of you may have dozen years of experience, but that leading part may not be that full 3 years needed, assuming you have a bachelor degree. So for a project management professional, it's important to focus on leadership skills, including, but not necessarily limited to, the following. Obvious, leading people and teams. 2, you could be an analyzer of a lot of project data, gather insights, use intelligence on making decisions for project implementation. That's leadership. Making difficult choices, especially in high-stake environment. Creating or approving important project artifacts such as charter or project management plan. Developing, executing communication plans. Engaging stakeholders, especially executives and customers. Drinking the Kool-Aid. As I mentioned, project management is a fairly specialized field. On one hand, on the other hand, it's been around quite some time. So there are actually a lot of terms out there flying around. Here, our general recommendation is you're going after a PMI certification, so not somebody else's. Well, you got to speak the language. You got to use the words. You got to understand what are project lifecycle, what are the 10 knowledge areas or performance domains that PMI mentioned, what are the relevant processes and artifacts and the tools and techniques. Another, by the way, a shorter read, which I think is a very pivotal read, is the PMI examination content outline. Here, you could download from PMI for free. If you click on our presentation, I know in video you couldn't, you could actually get the link to download the ECO. To me, this is the second most important document when preparing for the certification. The first one, by the way, being the project management body of knowledge. Right? This document contains specific tasks and that project manager performed. This, not a very big document. It's only about, 20, 30 pages, I think. It's a relatively short document. It's a fairly dense document. It is based on the PMI's role delineation study. What it means is they go out, ask thousands of project practitioners, hey, John, what do you do? Or Jane, how do you perform certain work? And they analyze that through combination of aggregating data, cluster analysis. They came up with a list of primary tasks that project managers perform. So the reason why it's a second important document is PMI then designed the exam according to those tasks and skills. The examination content outline gives you a rough breakdown of what those number of questions tend to be. But it's also a vitally important document as you prepare for your PMP because in some ways it's a checklist. If you go and read through the task, the simple question to ask is, do I know what it means? Do I know what it means about, let's say, creating a work breakdown structure? Because if I don't, well, that's one area you need to study a lot harder. And by the way, if you don't match most of the things to your career and to what you have done, maybe PMP is not the right certification for you. So that's why it's important. Understand the language. And then, by the way, also consider reading the PMP handbook, which contains a lot more detail about maintaining, applying, taking the exam of the PMP. So it's a good resource to have. Again, you could download that for free on pmi.org. The third part, as I mentioned, finding references, is you reflect upon your experiences. Think about the customers, the managers, the supervisors who can confirm your work experience. And make sure you have their up-to-date information, because if you get audited, now you need to contact them. Ideally, I would just call them or email them and ask them for permission, as you will be using them in your PMI application. And depending on the number of experiences you provide, generally our recommendation for the contact to consider are your sponsor, or someone that really serves as your manager, supervisor, or somewhere in the steering committee or governance team. That carries a bit extra weight because they're your boss or supervisor. So one of the first references to consider are those sponsors. The second part, because your project experience may only be a year in that environment, the second one could be your direct report. These are people who you directly manage, and are somehow associated with your project or program or portfolio. The third is your customer or client. It could also be your peer. So if you have choice of including 3 references, our recommendations: have a sponsor, have a direct report, have a customer or client. Now, if you don't have exactly those, you could substitute. Could be somebody who's your peer. Maybe you can include 2 direct reports or 2 sponsors. But make sure it is a combination. So one of each is great. If not, at least have some combination. And by the way, by identifying people now and making sure you have their contact information, this can save you a ton of time if your application is audited. Now, with all that homework done, you're ready to complete the application. And the application is actually quite straightforward. It asks you to describe your experience. Now, make sure you emphasize your leadership experience. Provides a little bit of context of what the project is, perhaps even what part of the strategy of the organization or portfolio that fits in. But then talk about what you have done. You need to enter your duration of the project that you led in month, and make sure you summarize your experience concisely. Our recommendation, 350 words is good enough. Don't be so skimpy and go under 200 words. I think that is too light. And of course, don't be very verbose and go to 500, 600, 700 words. For the PMP, the project description ideally follow this format. A brief 1-sentence project objective. Think about the business case. What drove you or drove the organization to instate this particular project? Second, project deliverable summarized by the various process areas such as initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. Abbreviations are quite acceptable here for the common terms. But I would say, in general, spell it out. Use only abbreviation if you refer to, say, initiation many times. A brief 1-sentence project outcome, which may include the lessons learned. So what have you actually accomplished? Avoid overlapping experience whenever possible. This means that if you have 2 projects you led at the same time, can you include it? Absolutely. Should you be honest that they do have overlap? Absolutely. But if you have a plethora of choices, our suggestion is reduce that confusion. Because when you have 2 projects simultaneously or have a big overlap, there is going to be a question of, well, what's the allocation, project A and project B? You sort of raise the question on other projects you raised. Did you truly spend your full time in the project leadership role, or you just play many roles that happen to be one of them? So generally, to keep things simple, keep the reviewer, easy to check the boxes, we will say, keep them singular and non-overlapping if possible. And of course, be truthful. That is more important than even possible. But a lot of us who apply for PMP have quite a ton of experience, right? So in 3 years leadership, if you being a project manager for 10 years, is quite easily to write up. Here's some additional guidelines. Emphasize the unique skills and tasks for each project so there's a little bit more variety. So one project, for example, you tackle quite a bit in the area of change. You adopted a traditional waterfall and change management was heavy. So that was good. Another project, maybe it's about stakeholder. You're working on a fairly political project and constantly figure out how to manage people. Tailor each project description to the particular deliverables and the stakeholder of that project, so it doesn't look like cookie cutter approach. The goal is to demonstrate your leadership and skills across all your projects to create an overall impression of yourself as that project manager leading the project. Use straightforward and concise language, avoid fillers, jargons, acronyms as much as possible, and use the PMO guide terms when they fit naturally. The keywords fit naturally. Make sure you learn these jargons: project charter, project management plan, project information management system. Make sure these flows naturally into your sentence. Because if it seems like you really just try to force fit something in, it comes across that you may not be that familiar with project management. As in writing any good essay, use active voice, avoid passive voice. Now, there are times for passive voice. This is not to say eliminate them completely. But use, if you are the main actor making that tough decision, use I. I made a tough decision. And by the way, even if you make mistakes, sometimes you learn more from the mistakes. So don't be afraid of talking just about the winning. Oh, the project was successful. We achieved our deliverable for X, Y, and Z. Fit everything in time. Maybe didn't. Things didn't go quite right. You're confronting with some significant headwinds. You can use that as well, because it's not a judgment call. It is looking at you of having that experience of being that project manager. And then use the appropriate verb tense. If you write something that has already completed, clearly that's in the past. If you're still writing about something you are leading at the time of writing the application, present tense is completely fair. I would say avoid using future tense, by the way, because then that's looking ahead, and hopefully those experience, you already have enough experience. You don't need those experience to count for that 36 month, for example. There's quite an additional hint that if you click on this page here, and we'll make this presentation available, you're able to see it. Some do's and don'ts. This is sort of last minute good practice advice. Plan ahead and take your time to gather information. This is especially important if your job title doesn't naturally contain the word project manager. So, for example, if your title is team lead, and by the way, in some organization, for example, I think Dun & Bradstreet some year ago, I was looking at a job there, the team leader is actually a pretty big deal. It could be equivalent easily to a vice president, in some cases senior vice president of a comparable company. So if your title is a team lead and you're applying for PMP, just be prepared to describe your experience and justify why you qualify. Reach out to your contacts, who you may use as references to vouch for your experience, and if audited, that means you could complete it within a couple of days. Understand PMI lexicon and use the appropriate words. These are drinking the Kool-Aid. Do use the first person I whenever possible and show your leadership. And by the way, this is one of the few times in life that you don't want to be too modest. Don't use the word we just to be polite. Now, there are contexts you may have to use we, but just don't use it because it sounds more polite than using I. So in this case, you are authorized to be a bit self-centered. Be honest and real and examine your qualifications critically. Make sure they genuinely fulfill the PMI requirement, not just by the letter, but also in spirit. Think about that leadership. You may have a title project manager, but really it's just a level in your organization. So maybe even though you have the title, it may not be quite fitting. What are some of the don'ts? Well, don't underestimate the effort required to complete the application. It requires multiple iteration. This is especially true if English is not your first language. Remember, chances are the reviewer are English speaker. If they can't understand what you wrote, they can't approve it. So this is where you may actually want to invest in time and energy, find a friend or relative who's quite strong in English, help you at least edit it and write it, and maybe you want to even hire an editor. Do not exaggerate your experience. Even if you qualify for the certification, you will have a very difficult time on the exam. And let's say you don't have quite that leadership experience and you're just starting out. There's no shame to that. By the way, PMI have the CAPM, Certified Associate and Project Manager, so maybe you should qualify and consider for that. And even if you attain the certification, most employers who's looking for project manager just doesn't look for PMP. They also look for your experience. For example, I was previously director of one of the largest project services in one of the big 5 audit tax accounting firm. I hire on average a good year somewhere around 20 project managers a year between the full-time and consulting staff to work on, hundreds of projects that we have. Never once have I looked at somebody's PMP and say, I want to hire that person. What often happens is I review a ton of applications and it came down to a couple good ones. And then let's say person A, person B, person C all have equivalent experiences, but person C have the PMP. That's where it stands out. Generally, smart managers do not hire somebody just because they have PMP. Smart manager hire people because they demonstrated their experience on their resume, and of course in an interview as well, and they also have PMP. So make sure that you don't want to set yourself up for failure. Do not try to say everything about your experience, by the way. Remember, the focus is your leadership experience. So talk about what are the objectives, what are your roles, what are the key outcome, deliverable, benefit, value. The more you can use metrics, quantifiable gains, the better you are. And finally, do not be afraid to claim appropriate responsibilities, even if your job title or job role do not match. If you led a team, it doesn't even matter what your title. You could be a project coordinator, but you genuinely being a coordinator of a major program responsible for making key decisions and leading teams, put that in. For more information, we also have a good blog article, so you may want to visit this page and this article here. This article is actually a bit more generic. It's not just about PMP, but also PGMP, PFMP, ACP, and RMP. So it's good. And we also presented this in a webinar. So the same page there could be another video, give you some fairly similar advice, by the way. So it could be a repeat. Finally, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and I'm the CEO of PMO Advisory. And our website is www.pmoadvisory.com. Our email, general email for most people to submit questions, is at CERT at pmoadvisory.com. And here are our numbers, and you can call us anytime. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this presentation to be valuable as you prepare for the PMP application. Good luck.